Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for this invitation to speak 10th anniversary of establishment of the mandate of Office of SRG on sexual violence in conflict. My name is Amina Arale. I'm here speaking as a witness and human rights defender who works with survivors of conflict-related sexual violence in Somalia. I'm also a standing solidarity with many thousands of victims and survivors of sexual violence in conflict around the world, not only women and girls, but also men and boys. As Somali women, having witnessed the impact of sexual violence in context of deeply rooted insecurity because of civil war and different religious ideology fighting, I joined the victims and survivors of other parts of the world who demand to end sexual violence in conflict. 10 years ago, there was absolute silence in Somalia about how sexual violence was being used as a tactic of war, primarily against women and girls. In fact, not only was there silence, but survivors were detained simply for sharing their histories. In 2013, a young female survived of gang rape in Mogadishu by the state force after survivors seek support by reporting what happened to her to journalists. They were both jailed in Mogadishu. The organization I work for, Somali Women Development Centre, mobilized all the effort to defend and to release the survivor and journalists, receiving a moral support from Somalian international community, and through advocacy intervention of Madam Zainab Hawa Bangura, the Special Representative of Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict at that time. She visited Mogadishu to show solidarity and provide emotional support to both survivors and journalists. This is just one success story. 10 years later, the sad reality is that while my organization manages more than 13 centers and 7 mobile clinics that provide specialized support, including medical, psychosocial, material, livelihood, legal aid, and shelter for the women and girls, we cannot reach the majority of survivors. There are many factors that contribute to this high level of insecurity because of persistent conflict, lack of access of IDPs and rural areas where the most vulnerable women and girls live, the shame and stigma that forces them into the silence. On this point, I want to say we need all to make sure that the stigma and the shame is placed on the perpetrators, because that's where it belongs. We need more operational response to stigma elevation, because stigma kills the mind and the body of the survivors. Socioeconomic integration support for the sexual violence survivors and their children must embrace and mainstreaming to humanitarian setting and peace-building efforts. Ladies and gentlemen, increase in sexual violence cases in Somalia is alarming, but at the same time breaking the silence and increasing visibility is remarkable for those who seek support. We call that survivors of SGBV are listened to, cared, provided full support, taking their willingness seriously and their needs put the first. The IDPs remain the most vulnerable to sexual violence, women and children being the main victim of survivors. 87% of the reported cases of sexual violence in 2018, according to the GBV IMS. We have heard many stories of survivors of conflict-related sexual violence, different age and different status of women and children on daily basis include 4-month baby rape, disabled woman raped, 9-month pregnant and delivered on the scene, 70 years old woman raped, a woman who just given birth raped, as young as many girls and teens raped and killed. Sexual violence committed in conflict must not be viewed as a minor crime. We cannot accept sexual and gender-based violence to be normalized and seen only women and girls issues. Today we pledge to do better for survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. We demand a change in attitude that blames survivors, not the perpetrators. The national and international laws are clear that rape and other forms of sexual violence are violations. But we face failures of behavior, accountability, and application of laws. We call government to enact and adapt sexual offense bill to strengthen the legal framework, enable the prosecution, and end the impunity of sexual violence. For the last 10 years, there are concrete development and changes prevention and response of SGBV in Somalia. The major achievements include nominated first female prosecutors in Somalia after independence, establishment specialized unit of SGBV at prosecutor's office, draft of sexual bill, development of national action plan to end sexual violence in conflict, establishment of gender desking in some police stations, and prosecution of perpetrators of sexual violence, although major challenges still facing up today. We believe that the progress can be made, but we must recognize that the primary responsibility lies with the government. We call Somali government to recognize equality for women in judiciary at all levels. Inclusion of women in judiciary is the right for women, but also because it's right for the achievement of more inclusive rule of law. We recommend to ensure that sexual violence prevention and response efforts are prioritized and adequately funded from the first phase and throughout the all responses to the conflict and humanitarian emergencies. Ladies and gentlemen, ending SGBV in conflict will require not only strong laws and effective justice system, but also social transformation of perceptions about the status and the role of women in society. It will require a deep acknowledgement of equal humanity of men and women, boys and girls. It will require leadership from the government and traditional institutions to recognize, respect, protect, and fulfill the rights of women and girls. Thank you.